This is kind of like Bob's stock of lost and misfit toys.
Yeah, the Island of Misfit saws.
Yes.
Some of this has been kind of
picked over.
Well, organized. Well, just by chassis. This is some 51 and 55 stuff.
Good handle right there.
Yeah, well, you got that, the top handle. I mean, this one is kind of locked up.
That's a perfect one.
Let's see. A couple more with everything missing. That's moving. There's no compression in there, but it's not locked up. This one, hard to say what's in there. I think the top end's actually missing this, but here's a complete. Yeah, this one's wiped. The muffler's gone. The starter's not there. This is kind of, other than that, it's a complete saw. You know, some of the stuff here, obviously, you don't want to have to go out and be buying carburetors and things like that. And like I said, some of the stuff has been stripped and categorized. For instance, like starters. Yeah, you need a starter. There's a starter. There's more starters. You know, side covers, top covers. You know, there's stuff laying all over the place. That's the 242 pile down below. This is all 272, 61s, 268s, and stuff like that. This is a 51. So this is a good 45 millimeter top end.
So that bottom end, just as it is.
Yeah.
With the plastic off the other saw is a running saw, right?
Yeah. There's not a mark on that piston. So that top end is good. The other thing too, another one I said, the defining characteristic of everything in this family is this kind of intake. Also, you've also got this the studs for your exhaust bolts. So which is actually kind of good because you don't ever have to worry about exhaust bolts stripping out in the cylinder.
So if a guy ran into a dealer and he found like this,
yeah,
legitimately, if you're a dealer, what kind of money would he have to throw at you in order for you to part?
Well, for me to like to say that, you know what, $25 you can have it, get it out of here.
For both of them.
Yeah, it's like, you know what, just this stuff because it builds up really. And this stuff is only worth something if somebody can buy it. Otherwise, that's why this stuff here is on the ground. Because, the 41s and 30, to me, that stuff's garbage.
Well, let's turn those into a dead saw salvage video.
Okay.
All right, camera's on.
Camera's on. The 5155 Saw College. Class is in session. You kids in the back, be quiet.
Oh, this is what I need right here. See it?
Yeah.
That's it right here.
No, let me take it then. Yeah, you never know. There's always a good part on a saw.
You see?
Even when it looks like this.
No.
What's left of it? I see some strange hardware in this thing.
I like that cover screw. That's the best.
That's what I mean. As part of the Dead Saw Salvage series, we wanted to talk about these 51s and 55s. And there's probably a lot of people yawning because they're not cool enough. They're not, for the most part, they're open port saws and people like to complain about them. But this is going to be part of the Dead Saw Salvage thing because every dealer that's been in business for 10 or 20 years has a pile of these things around. And the economics on used saws and used parts, they're only really valuable if you got a lot of guys coming in looking for the parts. And if you got a lot of customers with 372s that are breaking things, then a dead 372, there's value in the handle, the starter, and the side cover, and the tank, and everything else. These things are pretty much all in homeowner use. Yeah, they're not going to suffer those kind of catastrophic injuries for the most part. So these things build up and they build up, and there's really not a big market for the side covers and the parts as you take them off. So, you should be able to get these things, cheap, real cheap. I mean, even if they look like this is an older, it's actually a 50, and this top end is actually okay. This saw will run. Yeah, I mean, the top end will run. I don't think that saw's ever run. So there's kind of, this is actually an interesting story, and it's a story within a story. Why do all 55s and 51s, which is primarily what this is about, why are the cylinders for all these saws tapped here on the side, and why are they all tapped here on the top? All right, and the answer to that question is that there's other things that are related to this. And I worked on, you know, you work on tons of these things as a husky dealer because they're all over the place. And then it wasn't until I worked on, put this thing together, which is a Johns Root 490, which actually came from Walter here as a trade that we did. And then I realized that there's some similarities there. What you see here is this is where, like on modern saws, that's what these cylinders are tapped for, because you get the mount tied into the cylinder like you have on most of the new stuff. And then I realized too, and what we're going to call this whole family of saws, is the defining characteristic that they share is this kind of an intake, where you have the little impulse grommet that goes in here, and then you have the tube that goes on with the intake manifold, which is this. And I realized, you know what, these saws are related, you know, but something didn't make any sense. So I figured there's got to be a missing link somewhere, because why would I mean, these things don't look anything alike. Almost nothing interchanges, but the top ends are really the same, or basically interchangeable. And so we kind of got half the missing link, or what's left of one of the missing links, which is this thing here, which is a Partner P500. And according to the Acres site, this thing came out in the '79. Yeah, this is like, there's very similar to that, other than the intake and the choke with the filter setup. Most of this stuff will interchange with the 490. As you can see, I mean, there's...
Oh, check the handles out.
Yeah, obviously it's all the same. The mounts are the same. So this is the 500. This is actually an open port. The P5000 and the 5000 Plus are the closed ports. That is.
They share the same cases too?
Yeah, actually that's the same crankcase.
No kidding, look at
Yep.
that.
Yeah, and the 490 and the 590 Johns are really, for all intents and purposes, other than changing the air filter with that goofy choke setup, they are Partner saws that are just redone in bed. And this actually happens to be a closed port top end that for a 490. And it can go on the 55, it can go on the 50. It's got the full skirt piston on it.
Before you get going on this,
Yeah.
what did this come off of? This closed port?
It either came off of a Partner 5000, which this is the 500. It either came off of a 5000 or a 490 Johns Red.
Okay.
There's a lot of different cylinders in this family. That's a 44 millimeter open port.
And this one came off a...
Probably came off a 50 Rancher.
So what you're saying is these closed ports from the Partner 5000
Right.
and the Johns Red line will bolt on to, say, the Husqvarna 50 up through 55.
Yeah, it'll go on any of these. There's 3 cylinder sizes, piston sizes in this family. There's 44, there's 45, and there's 46. The only one you can still get OEM is the 46 millimeter, which was on the 55 up until they call it the Rancher, through the end of the model run. That's what they're still using down in South America, because they still make this thing down in South America.
Okay.
All right. There's one little thing you got to watch with these. There's a lot of interchangeability with the cylinders, but sometime around 1989, about the time that this was made, they made a change to the crankcase. And all the crankcases prior to 1989 will only take the 44 millimeter top ends, because the hole in the crankcase will only accept them. So you can put the 44, you could put this 44 closed port in this Rancher if you wanted to.
The bolt?
Yeah, but you couldn't go back the other way, because the 45 and the 46 millimeter cylinders will not fit in the old crankcases. So just a little thing, to keep an eye. Now there's more confusion there, because here again, there's so much stuff that's mixed up here. All the white top Ranchers, the 50 Ranchers, all had a 44.
Okay.
The 50 Specials, and I started calling it the 50 Special, they all have the 45. All right, so you can put any cylinder you want in those. Problem is, there's 50s that don't say Rancher or Special. So in that case, you got to go by the serial numbers.
Okay.
So if you're looking at like something like from 1987, it'll be a 50, but it won't really say special. It's probably gonna be a 54. You know, they start mixing up crankcases here. But there's a lot of different things. I mean, some of these saws don't look anything alike. You know, there's almost no similarity between these things, but they do share a lot of parts. The other thing that's kind of odd, since, you know, they kind of like cob this together. One of the best-selling chassis they ever had. It's got its own unique crankcase, but it also shares some parts with your favorite 254s.
And 154s.
Right, and it shares, well, actually, the 154 came out, I think, about a year after. It was in development, but it came out like a year after the 50 Rancher with the white top. But you know which, you know, was in development. But the fuel tank and the top handle and the muffler on a 55 are the same as on a 154, 254. So
That's
there's
good
like,
to know.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's cobbed together here. So you can come up with some interesting combinations. And one of the things we're going to try to figure out is, you know, people make a big deal out of these closed port top handles, which are hard to find. But really, with a 46 millimeter open port,
The displacement.
probably run with this,
Yeah.
you know, and probably going to have more torque.
No replacement for displacement.
So the target with this, you know, Walt set a target of $300 to $400 on the 385s, for the dead saw salvage thing. The target for this is doing these things for $100 or less, and having a good running saw that will keep up with most of the so-called hot 50cc class saws that everybody makes a big deal about.
But more importantly, it's going to be less expensive than any of those cheap under $200 saws you can get from a department store.
Oh yeah, not even close.
A 55, even with an open port, and Bob will cringe when I say even with the open port, is going to be pretty close to anything that's 50 to 55 cc's you can buy. It's just a bigger, older chassis.
The other thing too is that, you know, these things do have some pretty good lugging power. A lot of these saws were sold, you know, when they started writing Rancher on them, a lot of them were sold with 20-inch 3/8 bars. You know, so that's, you know, kind of pushing it for most saws in the 50cc class, but they were able to do it.
Well, and you made a point, boy, I wonder if I could dig up the video. Remember you brought one up that had the 8-pin or 9-pin?
I did an 8-pin 325.
325.
I kind of square filed it.
That thing
So-
cut as good as anything in that class.
Yeah.
So-
The other thing to point out too is that the parts for these saws are extremely cheap. If you want to plug in some aftermarket parts, if you've got a totally wiped top end, you can plug in some aftermarket parts on here, and you get cylinders probably online like $20.
So let's talk dollars here. What would a chassis with a blown up top end, for example, but most of the parts, what's that worth? I mean, what's the person thinking about in terms of investment?
Well, a lot of it has to do with cosmetics, unfortunately. Something that's this clean, you're probably going to have to pay a little bit for it, because you can, you know, in this case, you could rebuild a saw like this, and you could sell it for, $150, $200. So
Yeah,
there's
but you're
that,
still,
right?
you're still.
Most of what you're going to see is not going to be that pretty. Most of what you're going to find laying at a dealer's shop is a dead saw that looks like that. And
This was a climbing saw. Check this out.
yeah, I mean, this is Roger. I'm not using his last name. Roger's a pretty cool guy. But he brought in all these saws that were under the bench for ages, and I call this a protective coating, because as bad as that looks, some of these will clean up pretty nice. But I really think that and this is complete. You know, you don't want a saw that's missing too many parts, because it's gonna throw you over budget. You know, something simple like that, the side cover's gone. You know, they're gonna have to replace that. You know, so you know, the starter's all blown apart or stolen off of it. That's gonna throw you over the $100. But if you get a complete saw like this and it looks like that and it's wiped, you should be able to get that for $20.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So let's say just for shits and grins, instead of $20, if we went for say $40, and that means that something is easily repeatable, because you'll see that stuff on eBay all the time.
Yeah.
So let's say you start with a relatively complete saw, $40. For $60, can you get enough of a top end, carb kit, fuel line,
Yes.
and stuff like that to get it going?
Easily.
See, I think we need to do a video where we actually do that. What do you think?
Well, yeah. Why not?
We just actually
We
take
got-
one of these things,
We
and
got we got tons of them.
yeah,
I mean-
and build one and keep track of the costs, and it'll be the $100 build what can you get for $100 if you're willing to put some elbow grease into it?
Yeah.
And I would be willing to say that if you come up with one of these, and you get it running decent with a decent top end, it's gonna stick with anything you could buy for under $200. Is that fair?
Oh, easy. No, it'll, well, you mean buy new?
Yeah.
Oh, it'll destroy anything you can buy new for that kind of money.
And that's the point, because if you put in the right hard parts into that saw, you've got something that's gonna last as long as one of those cheap, under $200 saws.
Absolutely. And like I said, there's piles of these just about everywhere. You shouldn't have to pay very much. Another thing I want to point out on these intakes, it's a really simple intake. And because it's simple, a lot of people like to say that, well, it's not sophisticated enough and it's not that good. Considered how many of these things are out there and how long they last, this intake is as good as anything out there. A lot of people just repeat things that they've heard or read, you know, and people, for instance, say, you ought to get a Meteor piston, they're great. And so a lot of people say that because they've heard it a bunch of times, but they've never owned one. And I'm not saying, now, Meteor makes a good piston, but just an example. So people see this, oh yeah, that intake isn't that good. If you get a leak, it could be that impulse grommet. When you think of how many intake clamps and boots and pulse lines, you know, that leak on all kinds of other stills and Huskies and everything else, this is no more problematical than any of those. So,
you know where this comes from.
And this impulse grommet is like $1 instead of a $27 boot when it rips.
This comes from a video I had done a while back on, what was it? It was one of those pull-ins. And every one of those damn pulls I pulled apart had one of those grommets split. And Bob said then, he goes, you know something, you gotta look at the big picture here. So, and that's, you know, legitimate. I think what happens, I don't know if this is gonna make the video, but it might, is a guy like me, not you, will get, say, 15 saws in of that class.
Yeah.
And every one of them has the same problem. So every saw you have ever dealt with in that class has got that problem. Therefore, in my mind, 100% of those saws have got those problems.
But then there's the other thousands of saws that
are
didn't
out
come
there
in, that didn't fail.
That's right. And what his point is of the intake bits and pieces that fail, those are relatively inexpensive. And they're all, you know, all the intakes will fail at some point. But these are actually very cheap to fix. And I can see the point. What? How much does those grommets cost?
Like a buck or two.
And then you have that little rubber band for a intake.
Well, no, it's just that, right?
Those two things.
It's the same material, you know. It's not molded as interestingly as.
The other thing I found is oftentimes these damn things are stripped out. So really, you got to get the dam and the rubber band and the
yeah.
tube.
The thing about because what Walt's talking about is this partition wall. It's a little different on the.
But it's $8.
Yeah, it's not that, but you know what? It's one of the differences is on the.
This is not going to strip out.
Well, no, because this uses studs.
Right. The
The
ones
490 and the Partners uses studs. You know, the other ones, they got the coarse thread bolt
Yeah.
going into the plastic.
they strip out.
And if you get on it too much, you will strip it out.
But
things
even
like that
even so, it's $8 for the darn partition. I think
probably cleaning that and sticking a cheap piston in there, that thing will run.
it needs a cover.
Yeah, right. You know, and here again, like this top end, I know this top end will work. Yeah, that's still got some pop to it.
See? You see, this is what he's saying. You spend $20 on that, and you spend $40 on that, you got $60. Spend $8 on the petition, $9 when you include the little rubber hose tube there, and maybe $10 when you put the rubber band on there, and you got enough to put together a saw. You're under $100.
The other thing that's kind of I don't know where it belongs in the equation when you're doing any of these things is, you know, everything needs a bar and a chain.
That's true.
That throws everything out of budget, but you're talking just power ahead. Your bars and chain, 9 times out of 10, a guy's going to have some kind of bar or chain you can
$50.
throw on this thing anyway. If you don't have to buy it, you know, you buy a new one. But these saws they're reliable. They do a lot of work. There's so much firewood. There's still guys running these things. You know, so anyway, but like I said, this is how you're going to find it. You want it like that. You know, you can make it look like this, but you know, you're going to pay like twice as much for the clean one, if not 3 times as much.
It's not going to cut any better when you're done.
They might not even let if something this clean, they might not even let it go. And that's kind of what we did here. This thing came in, it was wiped. I think it was straight gas or something. And we, it's like, well, if it's that clean, you know, and here again, you don't even have to add the bar and chain, it came on there with it. Okay, well, we can rebuild that and sell this saw.
I think we have a project in the video. I think we do
Yeah.
a dead saw salvage.
Now, this is definitely a Roger little thing here. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, the early ones had a snap-on filter. This is the screw-on filter. And the little nut that this screws into is definitely prone to falling out. When you take this off and you turn it, that nut's going to fall out. So they couldn't find the nut, so they put a tie strap around it.
But it works.
That's a Roger deal.
But it works.
Like I said, Roger's a cool guy. I like him. So that's that. So that's the next dead saw salvage thing that we'll be playing around with.
Yeah, I think we do a video on that. We take one of these and keep track of dollars and cents and see if we can't make a $100 saw that runs better than a $300 saw. New.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's just, yeah.
See, I went up $100. He still said yeah.
Well, it depends on what where you're going. If you're going to modify the thing.